Okay, so the goal of this lecture, I was really written from the standpoint of like if you're coming into this new area, social gaming, and you have experience in other areas of gaming, what kind of things are useful, to take. I mean, it's not completely like a completely new crazy thing, right? So there's a lot of things that can be used. And it's called From Casual to Social, but that's just like because I had like a limit on the characters that I had to submit my section. But it actually, it's not just going to be about casual games, but also about like core games and online games. What kind of things you can bring into social. I was actually quite lucky, like during my career, because I had my first game I released was like an online soccer management game, which it was run by a service with subscription, etc. And then I've done a lot of casual games. I've done some like PlayStation 2, Xbox games as well. So I think I've had the opportunity to play with a little bit of everything. And that's some of it is what I'm trying to share. I moved to Playfish. So I'm a studio director in Playfish London. I moved to Playfish in September last year. And I used to work for EA before. So a couple of months afterwards, I was back at EA. I don't know if you were here in the morning when Christian was giving his speech, but he mentioned all this, we're proud to be part of the EA family. There's actually a piece of that family thing in it, which is real true. So like you don't leave the family. And that's pretty much what happened with me. So the way I've organized this is I'm going to start with, just talking a little bit about what social games are. Quick intro, like also a little bit of a history of how they've developed over time. And also like a bit of a guess of what they might be in the near future. This is all done with the intention of setting up the context for, like if you know what's happened in the past, what's going to happen, you might be able to see what kind of skills are useful. And then, that's the main part of the lecture, which is, we're going to go through like all these games and see what kind of things are useful if you're working on social games. And then at the end, we just make some remarks and get the floor, questions from the floor. So what are social games? I appreciate this is the second day of a 2-day summit. I mean, probably some of you work with social games and have been doing so for a long time. So for you guys, it probably will be a bit of a repeat. But even in that sense, I put it in a way that hopefully will kind of make some things more obvious, like what things are used for or not. So social game is a funny term, like as like you probably heard many people mentioning during these 2 days, like play has always been like a social thing. Games are always about social. So it's kind of like pleonasm, like a term that doesn't really feel right to some extent. And we did take a detour in the single player video game era, where gaming was all about sitting by yourself in a room. But hopefully we're getting out of that. In practice, when people mention social games, they mean games that are played over social networks, such as these ones. At this point, I just want to mention a little bit about Playfish. And Playfish was, founded with this mission of changing how the world plays games, and also partly on the belief that there was this perfect storm happening of two big trends. Games like World of Warcraft, having a huge success online, and also, and also platforms like the Wii coming out with like some really cool different things, different ways to play, etc. And why do I think this is relevant to what we do? Like first, MMOs are, if you really think about it, are a game that you play online with a lot of people you don't really necessarily know. I mean, some of them you might actually meet while you're playing the game, but the idea is that you go there and you play with, this big number of people. The Wii is a very different experience. Is a thing you do, usually at home with your friends. And social games are kind of like the best of both worlds on that. So a social game is actually something you play online, but with your friends. So you get the benefits from the scale and the fact that a lot of us live in much more like fragmented social networks as we did in the past. For example, I'm originally from Brazil, but I've been living abroad for 5 years, and social game is actually a good way for me to keep in touch with my friends back in Brazil. So what makes these games successful? You've heard these words like many times as well. I just want to give a bit of emphasis in what what I think what they mean to us anyway. So distribution, it's something like how the game gets, distributed, and social games, it's through the social networks, so it's viral. Engagement, so like how do you keep players interested in what you're doing? And there's a lot of focus on like regular, and be it like daily or monthly visits. And the third important piece that we always talk about when we're talking about social games is monetization. These games usually are like free to play, and then you monetize through like microtransactions. So whenever we're working on any game at Playfish, we're always thinking about these three things, like how we're going to get these games, how we're going to get people to like this game enough that they're going to distribute to their friends, how we're going to make a game that's going to make people want to come back to play it regularly, and how we're going to offer them like such value that they will actually pull out their cards or their PayPal account or whatever and give us some money. All right, so into social design. So how do you apply this? I'll just give like quick examples of how these things actually happen. So distribution. So in the past, it used to be you go to a retail store or you go to, let's say, Metacritic, and you see what game has the highest score, and you may want to buy the game. Today, the games get distributed as you go into Facebook, and then you see a friend of yours like asking for help. And it's actually pretty interesting, I think, that the call to action is not play this game. It really is like assist your friend. So it's meant that it's a very strong pull. Engagement, how games keep people engaged. So games like Farmville are very good at telling people like, okay, if you do this, you can come back by this time and you're going to get your result. So people kind of know when they have to come back, and they know they have to come back as well. But engagement has another piece, which is like re-engagement. Sometimes people are playing the game but they forget about it. But then it can be interesting, like when they see a feed and they say, oh, somebody's giving carrots, and actually really need carrots, and then you remember that if you click on the carrots, then you actually end up getting back to the game. So it's social design is all about reminding people that they could be playing the game at this moment as well. And monetization can be done like in very different ways. Like you can buy, regular things you do is like buy an item that makes gameplay easier for you or gives you an advantage over the game, or it can be, if a game has like a limited time you can play, you can buy a little bit of extra time. Like if you really want to play more in that day, you can spend a little bit of money and get a bit more time in the game. And it can also be things like services. So in Pet Society we have this nanny bot, which is if you don't want to be feeding your pet, you can get this nanny bot to take care of the pet for you, and also it's very handy if you're going on holidays. So we have like 3 or 7 day batteries that you put in, and then it just works, etc. So there's many different ways in which you can do this, but these are just some of the techniques you can use. So now that we discussed a little bit what are social games, I just want to go quickly through the how gameplay in these games evolved over time, and what might be in the future, what might be coming ahead in the future. So the very first games were very like simple. For gameplay standards, they were like almost not a game, but they had these very important and strong things, which are like they were played with their actual friends. So you had this concept of you could own one of your friends, and it was just kind of a funny thing to do. So like I own all these people, etc. And the gameplay was more like just this very simple market economy part, which is the more you got bought, the more expensive you became, etc., etc. So it was very like a very simple thing, but it was very effective in the beginning. The next sort of step was doing things like slightly more complex games. So it was basically like this text-based grinding machine that you could go and click, and then you got something, which had this psychological appeal that you were advancing. It's very good as well to know like how well we could click. If you click with right hand, left hand, it's kind of interesting way to analyze. But also they were also starting to introduce new social things like like the more friends you had, the better game you had. So you were kind of encouraged to not only be playing this game, but to bring all your friends with you and keep them playing all the time. The next step were games that started really to focus, take the gameplay a little bit further, and they were basically using like nothing, still very complicated, but very foundations of, like using the foundations of casual gameplay. Still focus on, like invites and making it very easy for you to bring your friends. And they also were very good into, putting you in the context of your friends and saying, like, okay, this guy is actually smarter than you, or like has a little bit, the brain's a little bit bigger than yours, which was quite very, very compelling for a lot of people. Like they couldn't stand the fact that, like, what, this guy is smarter than me? No way. So it's very, very much about competition, right? And by the way, this number one guy is like one of our programmers. He's Polish, and I will attest that he has the biggest brain I've ever seen. So this game probably does measure it very accurately, I guess. But then the next step, as the games were evolving, they were, getting to do even more things. So like Pet Society started, experimenting this idea of, like, okay, you're not just playing a game, you're in a virtual world. I mean, there were other games that did this, obviously, before, but socially. And they were also focusing on things like self-expression, like different emotions than just competition. So, like self-expression and things like you go and interact with, your character. This is me kissing, or not me, sorry, my pet kissing Tom Saris' pet. He's there, like putting his hand on his head because he's ashamed of it, but I'm not ashamed of our love. And they were also like working a little bit more with stuff like, virtual goods and, really, taking it to town, because he had this world. Suddenly you could put stuff, buy stuff for it and, decorate it, and connected with self-expression really made it, like people really wanted to go and make these things, kind of reflect their identity or show that they were cool. And then the current generation, like successful games, what they've done was, they went, to town with the engagement. So they do things, like appointment. Appointment is like a term that's used in the industry for, the mechanic that you basically tell the game when you want to come back. You say, I'm going to come back in one day, and the game tells you, okay, if you come back in one day, I'm going to give you this. If you don't, then I'm going to, throw all your money away, etc. It's kind of like an agreement you make with the game, and you choose the window you want to come back. And also they did things outside of the game, so like you can install like a browser toolbar, that kind of reminds you that your crop is ready, etc. So there's just really, really, putting a lot of effort into getting players engaged with the game. And also they did a lot of good work with, things like using the Facebook communication channels, like very, very smartly to, make sure that people, kept engaged as well, and to distribute the game. So, feeds, and make sure you keep watching for a feed. If a feed appears, you have to click on it to get this thing, or etc. So it's very powerful mechanics. Gift when it came out, were very, very powerful as well. And also things like not just depending on like internal, like organic growth, like from distribution between friends, but also starting to look into things like marketing, like using marketing heavily to kind of get users in. Right. So, you see that, the bag of tricks these games have been using has been like steadily increasing. And then it's fair to ask, like what might the future bring? Like, so what could be coming ahead? So one very successful game, like a recent game, was Happy Aquarium. It's pretty simple. Like when you look down to it, basically, you get fish, and then you feed them. And then if you feed them, they grow. If you don't feed them, they die. It's a very like simple concept that you get, and I think particularly because it's simple, it's pretty mass market, right? So you don't need to like have a PhD to play. So you just start. Everybody gets it, and they do it, and there's like something very like powerful just from watching the fish swim around the tank kind of thing. So this could be like one. I know a lot of people keep talking about making better experiences, bigger experiences, but who knows? I mean, the future might actually be, or partially be anyway, like a lot of like simpler games as well. But of course, there's the other camp, which is the complex games, like Sid Meier's bringing in Civilization to Facebook, and who knows if it's going to be like a heavily, simplified version. It's going to be pretty much the game, and how it's going to involve your friends. But we can expect a deep experience, I assume, and again that might be what the future will be like. As gamers, we have this discussion in the office many times. Like people keep thinking that, or some people say that, social game players are stupid. They click on feeds and they're not smart. And I really don't think it's about intelligence. I mean, some of it is about being game literate. So some of these people haven't really played games for a long time, and some of them have played very simple games. So they don't come to a game expecting, like 32 hours of gameplay and extra crazy levels of customization for everything. They come into the game just expecting to have a good time in the 5-10 minutes they have. So it could, like, one of the possibilities is that as Facebook, or these kind of games that get more established, these people are going to want something more, and so there's a defense for this possible future. Another thing, like we've seen like more and more different like emotions being engaged. So in the beginning, it was like all about competition, and then a bit of self-expression, about a little bit of cooperation, etc. But there hasn't been really that many like very cooperative games or community-based games. Games that you really need thousands of people to play. These games have usually been played like in silos, isolated. It could be that in the future there will be more of these games that where actually people interact more, and they have they start feeling other feelings besides like just jealousy or the feeling of competition. Brands, as each space, usually when they mature over time, it's quite normal for brands to get interested, or like brands and licenses, etc., to get interested and keep coming. So I think this will definitely happen. I don't know how big it's going to be. We expect it to be quite big, but let's see. Another option, is basically I can't see why some people just wouldn't use social networks as like pure distribution channels. So they don't want to connect their game to Facebook at all. They just want the fact the game is browser based. Instead of running from their own destination site, they run it from Facebook. And this could happen. I mean, obviously it's not the best use of Facebook, but I mean, could be that some people will try and do this in the future. Okay, so we discussed a little bit like what was social games and what was important for them and for them to be successful, and then took a quick look at it, how they've been evolving and what might be the future. So now I guess we can turn to the part of the lecture where we're going to start discussing what kind of things from other types of games you can use. So one thing that was very important, like for casual games, I mean for core games in the beginning, I guess, but particularly for casual games, was like games that had like this sense of familiarity, like you knew, like you didn't have to be taught any backstory, or you didn't have to read the manual like with the backstory or you didn't have to see a video for like 20 minutes to know what was going on. You basically would be thrown to the game, and a game like The Sims did that very well. I mean, it was like a household and with family, and everybody knows what's that like, and everybody knew instantly like what they needed to do, etc. So these things are also important for like Happy Aquarium is a good example. Like everybody knows what a fish tank is, and that if they don't feed the fish die, etc. Same with farming. So familiarity was powerful. I mean, it's powerful for casual games. It's also very powerful for social games. Relevance. So same way that things like Wii Fit were very popular because they connected with something that mattered, like for people, like really mattered outside of the digital world. Social games already have that from scratch because they're about friends, so they already have like a real world relevance that some games don't. But the more relevant you can make, probably the better it's going to be. Things like simplicity, again, like making things simple and easy to do, etc. Where is very powerful for casual games, and the same for social. Like if you particularly if you think that these games are played on a browser, the same way we would talk like about lowering the barriers to entry. Like it's very easy. You don't need to install anything. You just go and click. and there's no like installation, doesn't go into a hard drive. There's nothing. I mean, it's a very, very lower barrier to entry. Same, like one of the effects of that is that it's very, very easy to quit because you've invested like nothing to get into it. So it really needs to capture you in the first seconds. Otherwise, people are just gonna. It's very easy to like click and go. I mean, close the window or go and do something else on web, like go to YouTube or etc. So it's a very competitive, like competitive for attention sort of environment. And the same, like this goes together with like easy to learn, like things like if people are gonna take. I mean, if people are going to need, like, let's say, 10 minutes to learn what your game is about, they probably won't, unless there's, like, a pretty good reason. But, I mean, they probably will look at it and say, I don't really get why I'm going to, okay, I'll go and do something else. So it's really, really important that you pay a lot of attention to, how you bring those players into the game. So switching to, like, more, like, hardcore games. Balancing is actually pretty important, like, for social games, particularly because they are very dynamic based, and that you get it live, and then basically you keep tweaking forever. So any skills you might have in balancing, make sure things work perfectly is really important, and but also like know that you won't just do it until the launch. You definitely will be doing a lot of that, like all the time, and the more Facebook can add new features that affect the way your game works, and you kind of have to go and rebalance everything. So deep experience. So a lot of these games, like they or these successful ones anyway, they look simple, but they are surprisingly deep after you've been into them for a while. There's actually quite a lot of things to do, like in Pet Society, and I mean you won't be exposed to all of that in the beginning. And that's on purpose. But if you stay in the game for a long time, you're gonna start finding out like new other things to do, and that's actually pretty important because you need. I mean, ideally, you need the players to keep playing your game for as long as possible, and so that's why you kind of need to. You can't just have like a very, very shallow experience because that's not going to hold. And that's where like the very first social games fell down, was because they were like very, very shallow experiences, which were fine for like doing this explosive growth, but then they would not keep anybody. People would play for like an hour and then be happy with it. So you do need to make these experiences deep over time. And you might not actually have to launch with a deep game, but you will have to like figure this out at some point. And connected to this is like long-term building. So people want, I mean, if they play the game for a very long time and they invest a lot of time, they usually want to have something to show for it, right? So Farmville is a good example as well. Like you look at experienced players farm, and you can see that they spend a lot of time in the game, right? So this is like I mean, it's very connected to like self-expression, etc. But it's a way for also to keep players engaged. They know that the more time they spend, the more they can do. Now switching to like online games, so games like MMOs or virtual worlds. Or one thing they do really well is keeping the game fresh. It's like adding new things and etc. And that's an expectation that social players also have of their games. If you can't expect the game to go live and just stay like that for a long time. Like at Playfish, we do at least like once a week an update on all of our games. Like each game has like at least one update per week, and it's actually something the players came to expect, and they want for games that are very heavy on customization, etc. They expect new items, new things to do, etc. And so this is something that you definitely will have to kind of plan and do like a roadmap for. Building community. So there's been a few talks that touch this subject, and it's actually pretty important that you connect with the players and try to give this sense of that they're all in it together. You can't just again like expect that they will come love your game and stay, etc. I mean, they will have problems, or they will want to share things between each other, and it's quite community is a quite powerful thing for online games, and it remains so for social. Adapting to player behavior. So one thing that it's one of the benefits from being like online and digital, etc., is that you can keep changing your content and what you have regularly, and it's definitely the one thing you need to do, and also, but more importantly, is to adapt to what the players are doing or what the players want. There's a lot of talk earlier as well, these companies, they start with put a game live and have a roadmap of the next 6 to 9 months of what they're going to do. And it's true, we do have a roadmap, but I'll tell that we changed that roadmap maybe 3-4 times a month anyway, because we start with the plans okay, this is what the players are going to want, and then as soon as the game is live, we say, whoa, they're all using this part of the game that we didn't really think they would be using that much. They're actually going to town on that. So let's go and focus the efforts on this, or this particular part of the game is really not being received well. We really need to do something about it. So yeah, we need to plan, but you also need to be very quick to adapt. And also there's again a lot of discussion about how the Asian developers are coming to Facebook and etc. And they have this advantage because they live in this microtransaction virtual good world. And there's definitely some truth in there. If you need to be good at, what kind of things you can sell, what kind of things, for what price. This, if you have previous experience with this stuff, this is definitely going to come in useful. I mean, even more so. But it's definitely a very key skill. It's being aware of, price sensitivity, seeing what the other games are charging. There's many times we have sometimes our games, they pin sales in a week, and then we realize it's because all the other games in the same kind of segment were doing sales on that week. So it is kind of like a retail environment. If everybody goes on sale, you kind of have to go as well, otherwise they might all just go and flock and spend the money on the other games. And then, one thing that it's actually very, very important, for working on this space, and it's not really games, but I thought I wanted to mention anyway because it's so important, is to have a web development mentality, and that includes things like being very analytics driven, and doing things like A/B testing, which is having 2 different versions of something and putting them both live to different audiences and see which one surfaces to be the winner, and then you optimize for that. Yeah, we have this kind of a rule, an unofficial rule in Playfish, this test, don't guess. If people are having this argument about a feature, and if the argument goes over 1 minute, then we say, okay, let's A/B test it, because otherwise it becomes just people's intuition finding against other people's intuition, and then who's right, and you're going to spend that's actually very good for the pub on Friday night, but it's not very productive. We find that just putting it out there and seeing the results gives us better results than just. So yeah, test, don't guess. So, as you could see, and I guess it could also be noticed from all these couple of days and by following the industry, there's a lot of things you can use. And it's more, the way I see it is more what you can use for what stage of the game. So let's say if this is the experience of, a player will have, from a game, you really should be making the first, touch points, the first 10 seconds, the first 5 minutes, the first 2 days of the experience, very, very casual. And that means, easy to learn, simple, approachable, rewarding, all the things are good about casual games, you should be doing on the first touch points of the player. And then as they made the decision that they really want to stick with your game, which is what they do if they stay for over than let's say a couple of weeks, then at that point you can turn on and start focusing on things like building community or making them trying to get involved with the community, adding new features, balancing, etc. Yeah, so really it's a case of, like you get all the things I said in the beginning for casual and then for Common Online and you use it. So if you're looking for, like for all the people with cameras, if you're looking for like one slide that like summarizes my whole lecture, this is it. So if you want to go ahead and use it, I'll give you like a couple of seconds. All right, so, but aside from doing the, okay, sorry. I'll give you a couple more seconds. It's actually a pretty useful water break. I think I'll do that more in my future. All right, okay. But it's very. I mean, whenever you're defining something, sometimes it's very useful to define what it's not. And I think in that sense, I also wanted to mention what are the things that need to leave behind if you're going into social games. So I think that's like the single biggest pitfall you might have is, if you try to design a game and try to make it social later, which I'm sure like it sounds obvious, but it's actually like a really big thing, and there's a lot of people who make this mistake. And also that, you really need to come into this like and be ready to unlearn. So I know, like, particularly if you've done a lot of games and you have success in other areas, you will come and you say, yeah, I know everything, I know what, I'll just design a game and add a feed here and an invite button here and it's going to work, it's going to be great. And I can truly say that I've been at Playfish, like I said, for, 5-6 months now, and there was never like a more intense learning period in my life. Like everything that I thought was right. It's very common that, I have an instinct about something, and most of the time if I try to do that, it's the wrong thing to do. So you really have to kind of double question yourself and like all the time and see, okay, just try stuff out and see what happens, watch the space. But be ready to, like really, be humble about it and say, I don't know anything about this and I really need to learn. Obviously monetization, like if you use from working on a business model where people pay up front for your stuff, be it like a console game or a mobile game or something. This is actually a pretty big change. Like everything you do in your game needs to be, on a social game, everything you need to do in a game needs to be kind of connected to the monetization somehow, or it will affect monetization. So you really like this spans the whole experience. It's not possible to just do the game and then get somebody in the room to can you please find out what it can sell from here, and it's not how that works at all. Like everything works together for that to happen. Same with balancing. Balancing like is not just like gameplay balancing. You really need to balance everything. Like the time between visits is how much things cost. Like it's a very different discipline, and that's why. If you were on Chris's presentation in the morning, he was mentioning like the rise of the quants and the number of people. And every one of our teams has some people who are there just to look at the numbers and make sure that the numbers work, do the curves we want them to, rather than just leave it to like chance or. And then like other common things, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but like other common problems are, like if you make like very complex UI, and this might actually be two things. It's actually a very, very easy problem to have. Like first is if you expect, you might come in and just design like this horrific game and you think that's good, but then you realize it's not afterwards. Or it happens like a lot with our games, like we add features, and then we realize 6 months in that the UI is actually quite cluttered now because we've been adding all these things, and we're like, wow, we need to kind of clean this up. So it's a very common problem. Long tutorials. Again, people will make a decision if they want to play your game like in 2-3 minutes. Like they really are not willing, to wait a long time to kind of learn what your game's about. Things like design, depending on, again, on what games you worked in the past, sometimes you would always worry about, what about the ending? What's going to happen at the end? What kind of reward we're going to give to the player, etc. And that's not really how these games work. They're not very story-driven usually. They're just built to kind of, allow you to expand. So, if you're planning, this is one thing you shouldn't really worry about, and you shouldn't really try and design one as well, because what you actually want is for people to stay for a long time. It's a different type of game. It's kind of like an open-ended experience. And of course, like things like like sci-fi, fantasy war, which are very popular in other gaming scenes, they might not necessarily be the best thing to do here. I mean, at least for now, they might be in the future, but it's a common thing. You come and say, yeah, well, what I'm going to do is like Age of Empires, or it might not be necessarily the best thing to start with. Okay, so I just want to have like some final words, and then I'm going to open for questions if there are any. So as I hope you could have seen, there's like lots of things you can actually take. I mean, the context is different, but there's a lot of like skills that if you accumulate them in the past, you can actually use them. There's like this is a space like that is a very, very big opportunity to learn, and because you come in and the game keeps changing. So we're actually like in another session across the hall, and CrowdStar guys were there, and they were like, yeah, we're here sitting down as like a specialist in the scene, but we really launched like Happy Acquiring in September. So like from September to now, they already are like one of the exponents, right? So it doesn't take a long time to learn and to be competitive. But also like you need to come open to unlearn and not try to use like old tricks just because they worked for you in the past. They might not necessarily work again now. One thing that particularly for me always really, really interested me is the fact that this is like the biggest audience for games yet, and also you're very in direct contact with them. So like because you it's actually funny. This is my first GDC. I come here and I have, because Blackfish, like all the development is internal, and so we don't have like any development partners, and we don't have like a publisher. I mean, sure, we talk to Facebook, I guess, but so it's the first time I come to GDC and I have 0 meetings. It's awesome. But because basically you're talking to the consumer directly, like they pay you money, you send communications directly with them, and so it's very, very interesting, and also like the fact that you can see what they do on your game. So like you release a new feature and then you see like immediately, or a couple of days afterwards, you look at the data and you say, wow, this really worked, or wow, this definitely didn't work. Like let's take it out, or so it's actually quite interesting. And I would say like if you're leaning towards doing it, yeah, I would say do it because it's an interesting space. It's a good time, and yeah, definitely an interesting place to be at. So I'm going to move into questions, but before I do, I just wanted to do like a very quick plug that we're hiring everywhere. So like we have offices in San Francisco, London, Tromsø in Norway, and Beijing. So if you're interested in joining the team, come talk to me or go to our website. And now we can go back to questions, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming today. Thank you. So I guess there's a microphone over there on the left. Please fill your evaluation forms. I will not be like Dave and ask for you to put all 5s. 4s are fine for me. Yes, please.
Hi. I have a question about the nature of social games and the fact that it seems a lot of them are about cooperation rather than competition. I was wondering what you had to say about that and virality.
So the question is, a lot of the games seem to be about cooperation, not competition. I think in the beginning they were like mostly about competition, and then they evolved more into cooperation because I think it's a more like positive feeling. And I think that trend is going to continue, and we're going to see more games which are like more about people doing stuff together. I mean, because the game is, the social game is kind of an excuse for people to like socialize, right? And instead of going to the bar, they play a little game together. And these things are usually more fun if you're doing things together rather than just trying to compete. I mean, competition has its space, but I think cooperation will be bigger. Yeah.
Hi, my question is that I understand that making a game more viral, considering the virality and quality and monetization, I understand that. But what do you think about budget for advertisement? And you are starting from a very scratch, and after 3 years you are where you are. And what is the advice for the newcomer or new developer to be successful in Facebook application field, and how important is the marketing budget?
Okay, so the question is about marketing budgets, like
Yes.
how do you get
Yes.
along without them, and if you're starting out, etc.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Playfish spent very little in advertising in the first couple of years. We do expect to do more, but I think in the end this is still a space where even if you do have an ad in the corner, it still feels like an ad, right? I mean, if you get a friend. Particularly some of the Facebook ones, they say like, "Are you 34?" Like as if they didn't know my age. But, so you kind of feel already like a bit cheated because it's an ad. But this friend distribution is still like pretty powerful. So if you build your game in a way that it's very interesting for your friends to invite your friends, I think that is pretty powerful. Also, if you can expose to them that their friends are playing, and that's when the feeds come in and the social leaderboard. We have a lot of people coming for an interview in a company, and they're like, "Yeah, I never played any social games, but then I played one because I was coming for an interview, and then I realized that all my friends are playing because when they get in, they look at the leaderboard, and that kind of is a validator that that's a thing they should be doing. So I think if you expose that their friends are playing, and their friends want to play with them, I think that's still a very powerful growth driver. Like you could probably use some advertising, particularly in the beginning, but I think you can still go pretty far without it.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, thanks for the talk. My question is related to deep experience, comparing and contrasting with complexity. So if you could talk about maybe some thoughts on how you make a deep experience without necessarily increasing your complexity.
Yeah, so the question is how do you manage both having the need to have a deep experience, but also without keeping it complex. So I think complexity is particularly important in the beginning. So you do want your initial experience for your player to be very simple. But once they are invested in your game, so they played for let's say a month, and they built whatever they had very big, and let's say a huge farm. At that point, I think they're ready for more complexity because they already invested in the game. They're more like senior players. So what you need to be careful is you don't want to expose all that complexity to a new player because it might overwhelm them. But I think it's if you do it in a layered approach, I think it will definitely work.
Do you feel that there's a opening for a social game marketed towards the core gamers, and if so, would the same rules apply?
Yeah, so social game marketing for core gamers, if there's such an opportunity. I do think that time will come, and again, it's a bit of a game literacy problem because all these games, like I said in the beginning, they were aimed at people who were not necessarily big players, and also, we have this other unofficial kind of rule at Playfish, say, okay, every rule you add, you lose 10,000 DAU or whatever. So you really want to keep your game simple in general because they're going to be more mass market. But I think as more of the core experiences become social, I think because that's a trend that's already happening. A lot of games ask you to share your achievements or etc. And I think there's definitely space for that. I don't know exactly how that's going to come about, but again, there's opportunity. I think somebody will find a way to do it. The hardcore gamers are people in the end as well, and they are social, even though they might not be the best people at that. But I think there's definitely space for that. Yeah.
Hi. Now you've partnered with EA, you've got a lot more brands and properties to exploit. So you're saying Playfish aren't looking to work with external developers at all, then?
So the question is if Playfish works with external developers.
Yeah. Now you've got all the
brands,
possible EA brands, and there's only so much one company could do.
So I think even with we do want to make more games, but the problem with these games is that in the past I used to work a lot with let's say mobile games, and it was easy to kind of hire a company to do the game for you, and it wasn't the best quality because you had all these communication problems. They weren't part of your company, etc. But it was still doable. And of course, it works on the console business as well. But the problem with social games is that not only they have to develop the launch version, but you also have to maintain it and keep updating it for like a long, long time. So it just doesn't make sense, like even on a financial point of view for us, like to hire somebody and then we are dependent on that team for like a very long time. We'd rather just do it ourselves, and then if it works, we pile it up. If it doesn't, then we scale it down, or I don't know. But it makes more sense for us to do everything ourselves. Yeah.
And EA, you'll be in control of all the social gaming side of EA. Will Playfish be controlling all the what social games come out for EA, and not like will EA do any social games themselves?
If EA is going to do any social game themselves, I'm not sure I can speak about that. So I mean, we can try and catch up on that afterwards, but yeah, I'm not sure I can speak on that.
Okay, cheers.
Thank you.
Hi there. Yeah, this is about your comment about no long tutorials. So the game that I'm involved with, it's a social game. It is complex by nature. There's simpler and more complicated parts. All of it's pretty complicated, and even the simple parts are not. It's not really a standard game interface, just due to the requirements of the game. So I was wondering what you would suggest in terms of how to present the tutorial material in such a way that the users learn it quickly and don't get bored.
Okay, so the question is, what about if I have a complex game and I would it's not a standard experience and people will need to learn. So my first suggestion to you is like do something else. But if you can't, if you can't, I mean this is the same problem that software people have, and you won't find any new answers from like social people, because I mean all we do is try to steer clear from that. So I know we haven't done exquisitely crafted tutorials, because we just try to keep them as minimal as possible, or non-existent if possible. So sorry about that.
Okay.
All right, thanks everyone. Oh, one more. Okay, just because it's you, Dave.
Love you, Jeff. So, Dave Worrell from Plato. I'd love to get your view on how the dynamics of trying to enter and compete in a category, or a genre in social gaming, where there are established entrenched leaders, are similar to and different from in casual games, right? To a certain extent, you can ship just another shooter in console or another hidden object game in casual download on the assumption that users will have sort of burned through the finite amount of content that was presented to them in their last purchase. Obviously, things are a little different in social games, and I've seen Playfish really face their challenges. They try to take on entrenched competitors in categories like mob or poker. How feasible do you think it is to attack entrenched leaders in these kinds of genres and categories within social? Is it a solvable problem, and what do you think the big leverage points are?
Yeah, so the question is like, how about with games that have like an entrenched like leadership, another new game comes with a different category or the same category and tries to take them out. Well, I think, yeah, it's a little about the switching cost, right? I mean, if all your friends are playing on game, and the MMOs had that problem as well. Like if everybody's playing World of Warcraft, how do you take them out of there? And I think I'm not sure how this is going to pan out. All I know is like it's not impossible. I mean, Farmville was not the first farm game, and they've done it, so it's not impossible. It's pretty hard, but yeah. I mean, I would in general like recommend that people like steer clear of existing categories as much as possible. Just try to do your thing, and I mean, there's a lot of ideas there that haven't been explored, but yeah, I think it's possible anyway. But okay, so thanks everyone.